Hi guys, today I'm going to talk to Peter Berglez. He's a professor of media and communication science here in Jönköping University. He has been involved in several research projects, both as project leader and co-researcher, focusing on different aspects of traditional and social media's role in society, mainly in relation to war, conflicts, globalization, and the environment. He has worked as an expert consultant and/or given talks to the Academy of Finland Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, Swedish Institute of Agricultural and Environmental Engineering, and Norway's National Council for Quality in Higher Education, to mention a few. So he's very inside of environmental issues, social communication discussion around ambiental issues, but also and most importantly on how communication approach those things. So I'm very excited to have this conversation, and I hope it is useful for you too. So let's go to the interview. Peter, thank you so much for your time and also for your kindness to actually talk to me within this afternoon of May.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Berglez, and I'm a professor of media and communication studies at Jönköping University in Sweden. And my research very much focuses on journalism and the role of journalism in a globalized world. How can journalism help us to understand the complex world that we're living in, which very much involves relations between places, spaces, powers across continents. So that is one field, journalism. But then I've also very much focused on environmental communication, how media, journalism, but also other agents, how they actually represent, construct, portray different kinds of environmental issues, like climate change, for example. And this then has also led me into the concept of sustainability and sustainable development, how society, how culture deals with this concept. But yes, I think that I'll stop there.
Okay, yeah, we are gonna have a lot of time for you to approach some of the parts of your research, and also how it does have an interrelationship with communication, which is precisely my first question is, why in your opinion is it so difficult to conceptualize sustainability in relation with communication?
I'm not sure if it's that complicated or complex. Mm-hmm. I mean, of course it's a challenge, but I wouldn't say that it's totally impossible to understand sustainable development from a communication perspective. I mean, from my point of view, and what we have done in our research program of sustainable communication at Jönköping University is to simply to study how different aspects of sustainable development, how it is actually communicated by the media or by organizations, or how it is discussed on social media. So rather than actually proposing a very concrete definition of what sustainable communication is, we have simply studied how people actually communicate about, the water crisis or the energy crisis or the climate crisis or different types of challenges which have to do with sustainable development and Agenda 2030 goals. But of course, we have also made attempts to define more like in concrete, what is then? How can we understand something called like sustainable journalism or sustainable communication? And then we have somehow very much emphasized that it's very much a matter of sustainable communication is the kind of communication which reflects upon the relation between the past, the present, and the future. The basic idea here is that the way we communicate in contemporary times, the way we think about different types of sustainability challenges is very much a product of previous communication. And this, because, I mean, we somehow heritage language from previous generations. So the way we talk about different things in contemporary times is very much a product of the past. And in the same way, in the similar way, the future communication about different challenges will very much be determined by how we communicate about those issues in contemporary times. If we, in contemporary times, very much use a negative and destructive and antagonistic language, probably this will also negatively affect how we communicate in the future. So sustainable communication is somehow an attempt to, it's very much about, you know, reflecting upon our own language on how to understand and communicate the challenges that we somehow identify as common in the world concerning war, water, energy, and so forth. And to develop a language that is sustainable, a language and a form of communication that might contribute to positive solutions. But I would say that that is one very important aspect, to reflect upon the relation between the past, the present, and the future. The second aspect of sustainable communication would be to say that, I mean, it's the kind of communication which tries to integrate economy, ecological issues, and social issues. Because in sustainable development theory, it is very much emphasized that sustainable development is very much characterized by economic challenges, ecological challenges, including environment, climate change, etc., and social developments and challenges, including the, you know, democracy, welfare, the problem with poverty. And usually in our culture, we tend to reify those categories. Reify in the sense that we discuss them separately. We focus on one of them at the time. While sustainable communication is somehow, and it should be an attempt to avoid reification, and where we try to understand society in terms of relations between those types of sustainable challenges, to think about how social, economic, and ecological sustainability are very much intertwined, how they affect each other, and where we try to realize that they cannot be separated. And this would be like, this is like a big challenge for the media, because media very much, the media and journalism very much reify reality in the sense that they very much divide reality into those kind of different types of like discourses. We have the economic news, the political news, we have news about culture and so forth. While sustainable communication would be an attempt to maybe create new, more hybrid kinds of categories, where one somehow combines all those different types of thinking. And this kind of reified mode of thinking, where reality is somehow, we divide it into, we put different types of, like, economy, ecology, and the social into three different boxes. That is very much an heritage from the development of the modern nation state, and how the nation states developed, and economy in relation to politics and so forth. So it's very challenging.
Yes, it is. Now that I'm reading more about your work and other people that actually approach this sustainable communication idea, I understand why it's such a, for my opinion, why it's such a challenge. I mean, it's because we have to, like, stop thinking in terms of boxes and start to think in terms of layers, or something more like that, like dimensions of reality, you know. So it is really connected to what I'm approaching in my PhD dissertation also, because this is how I am trying to approach transmediality, is throughout this holistic perception, in which I don't exclude anything, and I try to look at the whole, understanding that they have different layers, or different gradations of importance in according to what I am looking for, to what I'm specifying my eye on, you know. So I believe this is something that we have to discuss more, because it's not just about sustainability, but it's also about other society points, you know. So,
but when it comes to, I totally agree. When it comes to sustainability, what makes it so? Why has it become so popular, if one might put it like that, or dominant in culture? It's also because very much it tends to operate in the way that Laclau and Mouffe would, you know, that they would say that it's like a super signifier. It's a signifier which is everywhere, which could be connected to so many different things, and very much it receives its authority and popularity just because it could be connected to so many different things, and no matter how we try to fixate its meaning, we will never be really satisfied, you know. But this is also what makes it, why it becomes also like a buzz. Some would say a buzz concept. Exactly, because it's not possible to define in a concrete way. But we focus more on the concept of sustainable communication, the role of communication.
Yeah.
How can communication contribute to sustainability goals, which are primarily very material kind of conditions or challenges? So it's also very much about relation between the symbolic communication and the material, which I started to think about theme parks, you know, and sustainability in relation to theme parks, that you mentioned, that concerning the merchandise and so forth, that they have a lot of, you know, they sell a lot of products which they buy from China and so forth, and it might be unsustainable from a material point of view.
Yeah.
So a theme park could be like sustainable or unsustainable from a material point of view, in terms of how do how is the organization or the company, how do they deal with garbage, with recycling, etc.? What kind of material do they use, blah, blah, blah. But a theme park could also be understood as sustainable and unsustainable from a more symbolic communicative perspective, in terms of what does a theme park, what does it communicate? When I enter a theme park, is it to escape a society or a world which is very much dominated and characterized by a lot of sustainability challenges? Or is there a connection between all those challenges and what is going on in the theme park? Does the theme park, in its stories, in its way of, its symbolic production, is it somehow repressing all those very difficult things going on in the world, so that when I enter the theme park, it's more like entering like a dream park, somewhere where I can somehow relax and forget about the world outside? Or is there an attempt to actually create some kind of communicative link between, the stories that goes on within the park and the big stories that go on out in society about climate change and so forth? And if a theme park wants to become sustainable, it needs to develop its sustainability skills in both respects, both on the material side and on the symbolic side. Otherwise, it becomes like incoherent,
Since I am approaching this throughout space, this idea of actually having material and symbolic working together in a holistic sense, like what is passing in symbols throughout this materialized thing, and vice versa. It is something that it's been calling my eye, like it's something that I notice when I think about the theme parks. And yeah, precisely this idea, this just the position between material and symbolic, I think it's like one of the key points of this approach of sustainable communication. So yeah, I'm very glad. But when you approach the idea of global journalism, you argue that it can be one of the points to reach sustainable development. What do you think about other types of media processes, such as marketing or advertising? Do you believe it may be like, I don't know, marketing, global marketing or global advertising, that it's not so in some way merchandising? I don't know. I'm just like throwing this question just as a curiosity.
Yeah. Look, I mean, to begin with, our research program at Jönköping University, to begin with, the name of it was sustainable journalism. And this concept, sustainable journalism, is still very relevant for us. But I think it was 2 years ago, we changed the name of the program to sustainable communication, because we somehow realized that even though journalism has an extremely important role to play, journalism is not the only agent here to be able to communicate sustainability issues. We can also include different kinds of, organizations, authorities, NGOs, of course, but also enterprises. So I think that when it comes to sustainable communication is somehow generated by all those agents, and the existence of sustainable communication in society is based upon the sum, it's the sum of, what journalism is doing, what a lot of organizations are doing, what NGOs are doing. This entire information and communication ecology. And I mean, journalism, all those communication agents might do good things and bad things. I mean, journalism on the one hand has the potential to highlight sustainable development goals. But in most cases, journalism very much does the opposite in terms of repressing those problems or issues by producing quick and dirty news instead, which is extremely commercially oriented, repressing all those problems, simply because media, it's also like a commercial, commercial. They have to find readers, listeners, users. So they produce what sells. So from that point of view, it's not necessarily a big difference between what the media industry does and what many other organizations or enterprises do. Although in the media field, in the journalism field, there is still very much this ideal that that journalism should somehow contribute to democracy, to development, and so forth. Companies, on the other hand, they could also, of course, communicate sustainability issues as part of the creation and as part of their, for example, CSR, that they take some kind of responsibility, social responsibility in society. And more enterprises very much emphasize, they want to build sustainability dimensions and values into their brands, so that when I think about a particular brand, I will also think about what they're doing for sustainable development. So from that point of view, of course, all types of organizations could contribute to some kind of positive communication, which make people aware of problems in the world. However, of course, we should not forget about the problem with greenwashing. So there is a long tradition of studying greenwashing, how companies pretend that they care for the environment, etc. But in reality, they don't. It's more a matter of manipulation. So I think that this kind of the tradition of greenwashing will become ever more important. And I somehow assume that your concept, what was it? Unsustainable transmediality is somehow connected to this.
Yeah, I'm not going to look to the discourses of the brand, like how the brand presents itself in a sustainable approach. Like I'm not gonna look if Disney says it is sustainable. I'm not more concerned about the processes that happen within the theme parks, but that's definitely a point of like development of this concept, because if we think about transmedia dynamics in a general sense, most of them produce a lot of things. Like they keep on expanding, their word building. It's always like getting larger and larger. And how does it connect to sustainability in a sense of what kind of materials, or even if it's not like physical, but even if it's online, how does it relate to this idea of sustainable word or a sustainable development? I think it's like a development of my dissertation, maybe. Okay. So it's really interesting. I like this approach of greenwashing too.
But I mean, now I'm just speculating, but one way of potentially like identifying some kind of greenwashing in the case of a theme park would be to, for example, if you would identify that the company very much tends to highlight that, look, in the case of A, B, and C, we are very sustainable, and very much highlighting that, while at the same time continuing to be very unsustainable when it comes to D, E, and F in many other respects.
Mm-hmm.
And that could also be include like processes going on within the theme park, what is going on there, different kinds of processes, practices, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I would like to also ask you, how do you believe that global journalism processes can assist places that are called deserts of news and information, such as, well, in Brazil, we have those hubs of communication, hubs of journalism, and there are a lot of places that are not assisted, like they are not heard. So how do you believe that maybe globalism processes can assist those places?
I'm not sure if that's the I mean, if global journalism is the kind of journalism which can be which could be, I mean, primarily helpful in this respect.
Mm-hmm.
What is much more worrying me is, you know, the decline of local journalism
Mm-hmm.
in many parts of the world. But that these hubs, there are more. There is this concentration, media concentration.
Yeah.
And this concentration also has to do with that more and more like regional and local media disappear. So more and more people in the periphery will receive their main information from those hubs, from those centers. So from my point of view, it's more a matter of, you know, it's very much a policy matter and a policy issue on how to remain diversity in the media landscape with a lot of local journalism. But global journalism could be discussed partly in relation to your question, in the sense that ideally a global journalism will somehow include information, perspectives, events from a diversity of continents, from many parts of the world. Because there is always this risk that global journalism becomes dominated by some information centers. And so that somehow the global journalism tends to reproduce the old structure of colonialism, for example, or like, you know, Western dominance and so forth.
Yeah.
Although today we live more like in a multipolar world, which is not, we cannot say it, because we have like China, we have the US, we have India, we have South America's upcoming power. But so one cannot say that that the US is as dominating as it was maybe like 30, 40 years ago. But yes, global journalism could be a mode of thinking among media practitioners, a mode of thinking about how the totality, how the entire world could and should be represented in the media flow.
Interesting.
Emphasizing a more cosmopolitan perspective, for example.
Yeah, you know, I have reread a book from Milton Santos. I don't know if you heard about him. He's a geographer from Brazil. Milton Santos.
Okay. Yeah.
He's a very important geographer from Brazil, and he speaks about the three ways which globalization can be observed. in society. One, it's the globalization as a fable, which is something that is mythical, that it's how it's sold to us. The second one, it's the globalization as it is, which is a very perverse and commercialized approach in which the only thing that actually works globally is how things are sold. And the third, it's for another globalization, which is like, how can we empower and give possibilities to other modes of society to actually emerge, like be a parent, like a peer, and let themselves show themselves. Like, it's not our gaze or somebody else's, but it's the gaze of the person that actually is like approaching and saying and speaking and you know, constructing their own sense of reality. So I think it has a relation to what is the potential of thinking of global approaches to media processes, like in which you are pointing out your journalism. So
unfortunately, I haven't read Professor Santos' work. It sounds very interesting. Speaking about, you know, buzz concepts, and I mean, the concept of globalization has also had like an incredible career, as some scholars would say, in the academic field. You know, it was not very common like 50 years ago, but it very much, it's it was very much, I think it was in the wake of the fall of the Berlin Wall in the 90s, where you got like scholars like Appadurai, later on Castells, and many others who started to talk about globalization, you know, and also there is this ongoing debate about whether this concept is useful or not. And some would call it a myth, and otherwise some would simply talk about economic processes. You know, globalization is all about, you know, economic relations, about market capitalism. But others would point out that no, it's much more complex. It's about, you know, economic, cultural, political, ecological processes. And I probably belong to that school, you know, that
me too.
Basically, it's about trying to understand how things are interconnected. And but from my point of view, I mean, global journalism has also, like, there's a lot of research about global journalism, and there are all different kinds of schools here as well. And the school that I belong to would rather emphasize global journalism as an epistemological practice. It's a way of developing knowledge about the relation between places, but not least the relation between the local and the global. Actually, sometimes I say that, sometimes I also say that, I tend to say that global journalism should be viewed as an extension of local journalism. It's a new kind of local journalism, because in a globalized world, in the local territory, we become very much affected by forces, powers, processes which are somewhere else and which are absent. So in order to understand what actually affects life here in Sweden or in Jönköping, we need to somehow to connect the local with the global. So it's more like a very it's an advanced form of local journalism, you know, because if we disconnect the local from the global, we will actually never understand fully how our life is affected by forces somewhere else.
It's always going to be something that it's out there, never going to be something that it's in here.
And it will create some kind of false understanding of social reality, of politics and so forth, because we will still think that Swedish society is very much affected by the institutions, by the powers within Sweden only.
Yeah.
We tend to, in culture, we tend to reify how we are affected by forces somewhere else. Like in Sweden, for example, I think it's every third new law derives from the European Union, from Brussels and Strasbourg. But this is never reflected in the media, in the Swedish media. So the Swedish media instead reproduces this idea that Swedish law derives from Sweden, like it was before. We somehow repress that, how we are actually affected by external actions. So global journalism or transnational journalism is somehow a way to make ourselves more aware about how things are connected. And this could in turn generate political action, emancipation, and so forth.
That's really interesting. And it actually has to do with this idea from DEUZE of media life. Like our conception of word, our conception of reality, our conception of experience, it's all part of this invisible thread in which is media nowadays. Like everything that we think of when we think of another country or another city, it's basically all intertwined on how we saw this place or heard about this place or even tasted something of this place that came through media in some sorts of ways. So it actually has also a connection to my last question, which is, from our research, we noticed a pattern that repeats formats consecutively in the creation of space, such as theme parks, in relation of selling experiences to maintain its relevance. In this regard, we also note that the construction of environments like this keeps transmedia user-producer relationship long-term, but at the same time, they are quite controversial in terms of sustainability per se. We are calling this process unsustainable transmedia, between parentheses, to emphasize that maybe some processes are sustainable and some are unsustainable. And how do you believe that such an approach can be useful for sustainable communication studies? And would you like to comment on something, like maybe give me some thoughts, comments, ideas?
I mean, perhaps, I mean, I think definitely, of course, it would be very relevant for the entire sustainability communication research field. Maybe you disagree here, but I do think that some of the things that I said in the beginning of our talk could be viewed as a response to your question. You know, when I talked about the materiality of sustainability action and the symbolic communicative dimension of sustainability actions. And for a theme park or for some other type of activity, enterprise, or blah, 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 to become sustainable, it has to be some kind of balance between what you do on the material side and on the communicative side.
Yeah.
But when it comes, I mean, when it comes to unsustainable transmediality, I mean, I do think, or it sounds as if it would also need to be connected to ideas about greenwashing.
Yeah.
Or am I totally wrong here? Could you give me an example of unsustainable transmediality? Could you give me a concrete example of what does it look like in the theme park?
Well, like I told you, maybe the merchandising that they produce to sell inside of the parks. But there is also one thing that it's not so upfront, but it happens, which is this relation that they have with the fandom, the people that consider themselves as fandom, as fans of the brand. Like in the inside of the park, it's not allowed to you to do cosplay, so you cannot dress like a character. And fans started to like subvert this idea by using, for example, the pattern of the colors of their favorite characters, so they can go making a reference of this character. So what Disney did was actually they created a line of products inside of the park, so people can do this kind of cosplay without without having to come from home. Like they can buy a shirt, they can buy a
so they somehow commercialize this, they somehow exploit this. From the beginning it was a non-commercial activity which they somehow exploit them.
Yes, precisely. And in my view, this is a kind of unsustainable transmedia, because you know, you cut off in some of ways the creativity of the fandom, and also you are reselling them their own idea, which is pretty much a very unsustainable approach to this. So all those processes, they seem to me like be unsustainable.
Okay, I mean, now I understand. And I mean, the greenwashing research is relevant in your case, given that at the same time as they do this that you're talking about, you know, exploiting taking the opportunity to sell in all respects, if they simultaneously also claim to be sustainable in other respects. But what I would look for is the contradictions. You know, that on the one hand, they're doing those bad things that you're talking about, but on the other hand, they might do a lot of good things. Those kind of contradictions are interesting, you know?
It may be interesting.
But I would also very much focus on everything, the economic, the social. I mean, how is it sustainable from a social point of view, a theme park, in terms of how democratic is it, how inclusive is it? Is it giving all guests the same kind of opportunity to do all the to visit all attractions, or is it somehow excluding some categories of people? That's a way of understanding it from a social sustainability perspective. And then you can also focus on from an environmental sustainability perspective. How is the theme park as a space and its ongoing practices and processes connected to, you know, the environment and so forth? And how is this connected to the economy, the things that you're talking about, mentioned before, you know, that they are like selling. So you can start with the economic side, the social side, the environmental side. How can the theme park be understood from all those three perspectives in a transmedia context, and how are they interrelated?
This idea of contradictions, I think it's really interesting. Just on the top of my head, I thought about the use that they do of recycling, which they do. They recycle a lot in the parks. And how is it related to the normalization that the US did around the sustainable approach? Like how did it begin? Like they started by doing recycling from the start, or they became recycling friendly because of a normalization? And also they have all these processes, those lawsuits that people that worked there are like suing Disney for poor work
And that is like a social sustainability issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so you can.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like this idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was more like an advanced brainstorming.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
but
exactly.
it's I very much look forward to see how your work develops further, and it's very exciting.
Yes, it is. Me too.
Yeah,
and I'm actually very, very interested on see how it's going to develop, because well, the PhD dissertation has a number of pages, has a space that it's like specific that we have to address, but I believe that there are a lot of possible branches that could come from this, like there's a lot of different approaches that we can think of. So I'm very excited to see what's going to happen.
Me too.
Yeah. So, Peter, would you like to comment on something else, or say something around what we discussed?
No, I just want to say that I very much appreciated this talk, and I think that even though the idea was that you were supposed to interview me, I very much feel that I have learned a lot.
Oh, it was an exchange.
So, it was really an exchange.
Yeah, I believe in that too.
Yeah.
So thank you so much again for your time, for your kindness to do this exchange with me. And like I told you, it's gonna be this video is gonna be subtitled, and it's gonna be available for my colleagues, researchers from Brazil. And also I will send you the link too, so if you want to send to somebody that you think it may may be useful for. So thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.